I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you a bit of a story. Our English listeners will remember Jack and Ori. Now, I've never been the greatest storyteller. Well, I'm not bad. I'm not a bad storyteller. I've never been the best reader of stories, so it's just as well I'm not reading anything. I'm just going to recount something very interesting that happened yesterday. Before I do that, I'm great at building stuff up and then jumping onto something else. Before I do that, I mentioned on Sunday View on Sunday, the Worldwide Wake Up event in Dublin was a resounding success. Fantastic reception for David there on Saturday. I've heard from Irish people whom I've known for many years who went to it and said they were thrilled with it, they were astounded, they were mesmerised, they came away educated, and they came away with a lot to think about. Now, I want to drag up that last week we talked about the campaign against anti-Semitism, which is a charity in the UK which seeks out anti-Semites and seeks to shut them down. Now, they've been making a lot of noise in Manchester. They threatened the O2 Apollo before David appeared. After David appeared, they contacted the Manchester City Council and demanded that Manchester City Council sanction the O2 Apollo Theatre for daring to have that racist, anti-Semite madman David Icke. Now, interestingly enough, the campaign against anti-Semitism were asking people who saw David in Manchester to send them their thoughts on what they'd seen and to report any anti-Semitism. Now, I understand that somebody from Campaign Against Anti-Semitism contacted the Helix Theatre in Dublin, made the same complaint that David was basically racist. So I would like you, please, if you went to see David at the Helix or Manchester, email investigations@antisemitism.uk. That's investigations@antisemitism.uk, and tell these people, with no influence from me or anybody else, tell them what you genuinely thought about David's appearance. What I would like to see, and I've already emailed them, and I will continue to email them until they respond, I would like them to publish the emails they received. After all, if we live in a fair and truthful and just world, why should groups like this get to libel and defame a man such as David Icke, who has never uttered an anti-Semitic or a racist statement in his entire life? Why should they be allowed to do it and then slink off back into the shadows and then go after somebody else? Why should they get away with it? They should publish every email sent to them in a display of balance. Okay? Excuse me. Right. Now, amazingly, back to my story. I love telling stories. Yesterday morning, Caroline, my fiancée, my long-time fiancée, my life partner and my soulmate, was off work yesterday. We had a few things to do, hence my crying off yesterday's programme. Okay, we had a bit to do and I couldn't get back to the studio in time to do anything. But yesterday morning, mid-morning, we went out with our dog to Alexandra Park, which is, of course, just off Princess Road, the main thoroughfare into Manchester from the south. Lovely park, Alexandra Park. We went there with our dog Jazz, and we did what you normally do with your dog. We played with her and we walked around the park having a merry old time. Now, a guy came up to us with a pup and started a conversation with us. And I have to say, I can only say it one way. The guy was one of these people you meet every now and then, completely insufferable. Insufferable. Within seconds, he told us that he was wealthy. He told us that he'd sold a council house in London for a massive amount of money, and he had bought a mansion in Whalley Range in Manchester. There's not many mansions in Whalley Range, but anyway, he then said that he was heir to a wealthy retail empire, that his parents owned 18 successful shops. They were retail magnates, and he also said he went to private school. This is true. I didn't ask for any of this information. Neither did the future Mrs. Allen, but we were given it anyway. Honest to Jesus, you couldn't make it up, right? It did occur to me, by the way, to ask him why was he in a council house in London if he went to a private school and he was heir to a retail fortune, but I didn't. You know why I didn't? Because I couldn't wait to get away from the guy, right? Anyway. Then he said his parents were pissed over Brexit. And when he looked at me with his eyes raised as if it was my turn now to venture an opinion, I said, well, I don't think they'll have very much to worry about, blah, blah, blah. So eventually this narcissistic guy, and you know the type of guy I mean, you get stuck with these guys every now and then, you can't get away from him. Eventually this guy, whom I was just about to walk away from, and I would do that with no qualms whatsoever. I would just walk away. I can't bear people like that. And I could see that Caroline was comatose with boredom. This guy asked me, what do I do? Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. So I said, I make or produce programs where we get a different type of opinion from the opinions that you expressed about Brexit there. Different types of opinions, alternative points of view we get. So he said, like conspiracies. And I said, yes, sometimes we talk about what you might call conspiracy theories. And then this incredibly rude narcissist, whom I'd only met 6 minutes before, said, oh, what a load of nonsense. That's just absolute nonsense. So I said, what's nonsense exactly? Conspiracy theories, nonsense, idiots. So I said, all right, name a theory you think is nonsense. I could see Caroline rolling her eyes in the back of her head. She was standing to the side of him. So I expected him to say September the 11th or JFK or something, I suppose, the sort of thing you'd expect people to say. And if he had it done, I would have politely made my excuses and said, look, there's a couple of things you can look at, a couple of facts you might not be aware of, and I would have left. But he didn't. He said, like the Rothschilds. And I said, do tell. Do tell. And this really happened now. And I'm not, you know, whenever you have a confrontation with somebody will always say, well, you remember it differently than the guy you had a confrontation with. And he's not here to give his account of it. But trust me, I'm telling you the way this went down. And he said, yeah, this conspiracy that Jews run the world. It's sickening, it's disgusting. So I said, are you Jewish, by the way? And he said, yes, I am. I said, okay. And I spent the next 30 seconds trying to explain to him who the Rothschilds were and the other banking families, Oppenheimer, Warburg, and what have you. And central banks, the creation of money, debt slavery, what Zionism is, and that it isn't a Jewish conspiracy. It never was a Jewish conspiracy. And when people talk about it, they're not talking about the Jews. Nobody is saying there's a little bunch of Jews, right, hiding somewhere, and they're controlling everything. And then he went and he did it, didn't he? He basically accused me of being anti-Semitic. He said, you're anti-Semitic and you're a racist. So I calmly, which is unusual for me because I'm not the calmest of people in the world when I'm dealing with idiots, I calmly said, you don't know what I'm saying at all. You basically forced your opinions on me, which I was happy to listen to. I gave my take on things. You don't like it, so your answer is you're a racist. And then he went on to rant about anti-Semitism has become rampant in Manchester in the last 4 years. So I said, well, give us an example. Have you experienced it? And he said, yeah. And I said, why do you go around advertising, number one, that you're Jewish? And he couldn't answer that. He couldn't answer me. So he resorted to more insults. He said, you make me nauseous. You make me want to get sick, people like you. So at that point, with nothing to lose, I said, well, there's a chemist around the corner. I'm sure they'll give you something over the counter for your nausea. Motilium is usually good for nausea. Luckily enough, a guy came along with another dog, and he was observing this, and he was listening with interest. And it kind of deteriorated. It didn't deteriorate any, into name calling and shouting and stuff like that. But I advised the guy very strongly not to call me a racist again, right? Without threatening him, which I wouldn't do. I said I wouldn't call me racist again if I were you. Not in public with people listening. I think very hard about that. I said, you're an ignoramus. You're an intellectual lightweight. You know nothing about Zionism. Why Zionism is a secret society. What it was brought about to do. Who founded it. And you're not going to call me racist for that. What was interesting was we walked away from it. And the chap who'd come along with the other dog followed us. And he said, I heard all that. I know this guy, he said. He's an idiot. Right? And I said, what do you mean? He said, oh, he's had issues with people before. I'm like, and I'm thinking in my own mind, how could that be possible? It's a big park. You don't just go up to people and start accusing them of anti-Semitism and racism. It was an interesting start to the day yesterday anyway. I was glad there were witnesses to it, because you never know when a guy like that will, because they're so full of hate, would go to a police officer and tell a lie and make a false statement and say that you said something you didn't say. But we had a witness to it, and that was that. Strange old thing to happen, that, out of the blue, in a very cold and wet, miserable Alexandra Park in the mid-morning yesterday morning, with nobody really else around the park apart from one or two people. I thought it was interesting. There you are. Thought I'd share that with you. So I'm going to move on. And just the timing of all that, you know what I mean? I don't believe there's anything to it, really. I don't think there's anything really sinister to it. But the timing of it, with all the nonsense about, from the campaign against anti-Semitism, about David and all that crap, I just thought the timing of it was very interesting. So I'm a coincidence theorist. Now, moving on, 18 minutes past the hour. So it was revealed today, it was announced today, no surprise to you or to me, that Parliament must vote on whether the government can start the Brexit process. The Supreme Court has ruled. The judgment means Theresa May cannot begin talks with the EU until MPs and peers give their backing, although this is expected to happen in time for the government's March deadline, the 31st of March. The courts did rule the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh and Northern Ireland assemblies did not need a say. Brexit Secretary David Davis basically said there will be a bill within days, a bill put before Parliament within days. Now, during the Supreme Court hearing, campaigners argued denying the UK Parliament a vote was undemocratic and a breach of long-standing constitutional principles. We're talking about two people here, the multi-millionaire hedge fund manager Gina Miller and the Portuguese hairdresser, or was he Spanish? I can't remember. They said triggering Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty, getting formal exit negotiations with the EU underway, would mean overturning existing UK law. They said that triggering Article 50 would mean overturning existing UK law, so MPs and peers should decide that. They're very happy with themselves. This is Gina Miller speaking outside the Supreme Court very shortly after the decision was handed down.
Only Parliament can grant rights to the British people, and only Parliament can take them away. No Prime Minister, no government can expect to be unanswerable or unchallenged. Parliament alone is sovereign. This ruling today means that MPs we have elected will rightfully have the opportunity to bring their invaluable experience and expertise to bear in helping the government select the best course in the forthcoming Brexit negotiations. Negotiations that will frame our place in the world and all our destinies to come. There is no doubt that Brexit is the most divisive issue of a generation. But this case was about the legal process, not politics.
Do you know what? She was right there. She stuttered. She said it was the most decisive decision. Of course, it was decisive, with nearly 53% of the UK public deciding to leave. Of course, it's political, right? These people will do anything, everything, regardless of any referendum vote, regardless of what the public voted to do. These people will do anything to prevent the European Union, the UK leaving the European Union. We'll come back to that in a minute. Now, Gerard Batten is a UKIP MEP. he asked a very interesting question today. He was wondering, and he was speaking to RT, why Theresa May didn't trigger Article 50 the day after the referendum.
What she should have done, of course, is triggered Article 50 straight away when she became Prime Minister. It only required a note on a piece of paper. There is no other mechanism. So if she'd have been serious, she could have done it then. Instead of that, we've had, a 7 months delay, and we now have this enormous amount of public money spent on the High Court and the Supreme Court. It all seems a bit pointless, really.
But is there perhaps a chance, then, that if MPs were given a vote at this stage, that could actually scupper Brexit?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, the whole point... I mean, I don't trust Theresa May anyway, as I've said on your show and other shows over and over again. She was a Remainer. If Remain had won, she'd be telling us it was the best thing since sliced bread. So,
well, she has now, though, hasn't she? She said it the other day.
If you analyse what she's actually said, she sounds as though she's saying the right thing, but in actual fact, she's not going to trigger Article 50 again until March. Then we're going to have 2 years of negotiations, and then the whole thing has to be voted on by Parliament. And at the time, I interpreted that as meaning that they could actually vote against whatever this great mythical deal is that she's going to come up with.
And that's exactly right. That is exactly what's going to happen. And that's what they achieved today. They basically gave the opportunity to those who campaigned against leaving the European Union to now scupper the deal entirely. And that's what's going to happen, or it's what they're going to attempt in the coming weeks before the March 31st deadline. We'll cover this, obviously, extensively as it happens. But let me just give you a couple of things that you might not know, because you're not told this by your media. At least not by your commercial media anyway. The FTSE 100 and the, I suppose, how would you call it, the broader FTSE 250 index, right, that's British businesses, British-based businesses, that's been trading higher than before the referendum. That's a massive statistic, that. Okay? The Bank of England cut interest rates from 0.5% to 0.25%. There's been no economic slump or recession, none whatsoever. The doom-mongers and the fear-mongers were saying, this is what's going to happen if we vote out. It hasn't happened. And you might know by now, and I mentioned this last week, the outgoing Bank of England Governor Mark Carney has reversed himself on the impact of leaving the European Union. Carney originally said we were screwed if we leave. That was before the referendum. Now, and I quote him directly, now Carney is saying, and he said on Friday, the financial stability issues are greater on the continent than they are for the UK. There's tremendous capacity, depth, breadth of financial services here in the UK. And Carney goes on to say, at the point of leaving, there will be capacity taken out because certain institutions aren't authorised. That is more likely to affect Europe than the UK. Remember, this is the same Mark Carney who was accused of meddling and supporting Project Fear, the campaign against Brexit before the June 23rd referendum. Imagine it. Now, I agree with Gerard Batten, the UKIP MEP, not because I support UKIP, I don't believe Theresa May wants to leave the European Union. I believe, like every other politician in the world, she says one thing, in fact means another. The Irish were sent back to the polls, the Danes were as well. And as I said a few minutes ago, this ruling gives the Parliament here the means to overturn the will of the people. What does that mean? Parliament is sovereign. I mean, the people are sovereign, surely. Not Parliament. The referendum was had. The referendum was an act of Parliament. Out meant out. Out meant leaving the single market. People voted out. They're not going to allow it. They're not going to allow it. News from the US, and you heard it at the top of the hour. The newly elected US President Donald Trump is going to back, and he has, via executive orders, two controversial pipelines. The pipelines are the Keystone XL and the Dakota Access pipelines, off the top of my head. I've lost the story. Now, way back in 2015, the Obama administration halted the Keystone pipeline. That would take crude oil from Canada to refineries on the Gulf Coast. And late last year, you might remember, if you listen to this program regularly, you will know that the US Army decided to look at other possible routes for the Dakota pipeline because of the proper protests by Native Americans. Trump signed an executive order anyway, and they're going to go ahead with these pipelines as planned. This is the Trump who said on Friday at his inauguration, remember, that basically he was an anti-establishment, pro-person or pro-people president.
The establishment protected itself, but not the citizens of our country. Their victories have not been your victories. And while they celebrated in our nation's capital, there was little to celebrate for struggling families all across our land.
That's what he said. But that's not what he's doing, Donald Trump. Now, what's interesting to me is that while all this is going on, and I look at all the broadsheet newspapers in Britain, in the US, in Europe on a daily basis, the broadsheet papers and the tabloids in America are still talking about Trump's alleged war with the mainstream media. These are still the big stories. It's still the big story. Trump and the media, Trump and the media. And you might have heard over the last couple of days, Chuck Todd of Meet the Press sat down with Kellyanne Conway, the counsellor to Trump, and they argued about what's the guy's name? Trump's press secretary being sent out to tell lies about how many people were at the inauguration and all of that. And I spoke at great length on Sunday about the fact that I've worked at pretty much all levels of the media, particularly in radio anyway, and that I find it staggeringly short-sighted and tragic that Trump's demonising of the media is being welcomed in the so-called independent media. Now, I'm not going to give you the whole spiel again, but it's dangerous. Basically, they being the globalists, the bankers, the military-industrial complex, the racist Zionists, want to go after the media in its entirety. Because for these people, buying up every media outlet on the planet isn't good enough. They want total control of it. Because they cannot control every single man and woman, every editor, every reporter. So what we're seeing here in the UK with Max Mosley, okay, an attempt to bring in press regulation on a scale never before seen, that's fully supported by the likes of Donald Trump and those who want him in power. And the short-sighted and the ignorant in the independent media think it's a great thing because those organisations are CNN, Fox and C-SPAN and the rest of them. Now, David Icke sent me a link to a Jonathan Pye clip, which was uploaded by Pye, I think a week ago or thereabouts. And it sums up perfectly, I think, what I've tried to say about this on Sunday View and today. This is the comedian Jonathan Pye who works for RT.
There's something good to be said for reading what people you disagree with read, even if it just confirms, your own stance, And if you don't, you end up arguing against things that don't exist. So, and all of them agree on one thing. The importance of freedom of the press. But the culture secretary, I don't know, you know about this, he wants to make it compulsory for all media outlets to sign up to a state regulator. All right, well, a royal charter, a state-sponsored and approved regulator, financed by well-known impartial fetishist Max Mosley. And if they don't sign up to it, Section 30 means if they're sued, they have to pay the costs no matter what. So the press are basically being blackmailed into signing up to it. And everyone thinks it's a great idea. But, I don't know, Tim. Look, we've had press freedom in this country for 300 years. Do you know what the price you pay for that is? The Daily Bigot. That's the fucking deal. Yeah. And look, I know why people are angry and upset by it, and I know this isn't a fashionable view, but hacking a murdered girl's phone or kicking Hugh Grant's door in, it's never been legal. These regulations, they won't make it more illegal. There's already a system in place to stop those horrible things happening. It's called the law. If a journalist or a newspaper breaks the law, send them to prison. And if they're not in prison, ask yourself why. Maybe it's because the people involved are best mates with the Prime Minister at the time. The government and the press should be kept apart. This legislation, it brings them close together. And look, I know something needs to be done. By all means, tighten libel and privacy laws and make access to legal aid easier if the press are fucking you about. But infringing on press freedoms, I just don't buy it as a viable solution.
No, well, it's not a viable solution, full stop. Now, Luga tweets, a state regulator, bollocks, Big Brother, Big Brother. Well, it's much, much more serious than Big Brother, there's no doubt about that. On the Supreme Court decision, Faisal tweets, it was the end of the illusion of representative democracy. It's the end of the pretense that we ever had freedom, tweets Faisal there. Sean Hinchcliffe tweets, if the Tories don't honour the referendum electorate, there could be riots and anarchy. Remember Thatcher's poll tax riots. Sean, with the greatest respect, I'd love nothing more than you to be right. When they delete the referendum result by doing what they've done in Denmark and in Ireland and finding a reason for another referendum, or when they give a false Brexit, a Brexit that really isn't a Brexit, that still has the UK tied to the customs union and the single market. You know what people will do, Sean? People will do what they did in Ireland and Denmark. They'll just sigh and say, oh, there you are. There you go. There you go. Spirit Samba tweets, what was the point of having a referendum if it can be overturned by Parliament? The will of the people is what matters. Number of people are asking me on Twitter, when did Jordan Maxwell join the Freemasons? Jordan Maxwell is not a Freemason. I don't know where that's coming from. Martin tweets, am I right in thinking that if an election happens in the UK before Article 50 is invoked, the referendum is null and void? Asks Martin. Martin, I don't know. Base Ninja tweets, there will be no Brexit. Come on, we all know this. The question is what's next? The further rise of fascism, methinks. Jane tweets, Parliament isn't sovereign. We, the people, are sovereign. Reading Red tweets, there was no such thing as a conscience. The Dalai Lama. Who could argue with that? And JP tweets, gods don't need religions. Religions need gods. Religions to confirm the legions equals religions. Himanshi says, loved your story. I encounter such people almost every day who don't believe in conspiracy theories and call me stupid. That's Himanshi there. Thank you, Himanshi, for that. Hi to Terry and hi to Gail. Lots of questions coming in for Jordan Maxwell. We'll get to as many of them as we can in the time we have him. We're going to have him for around about 90 minutes or thereabouts. Is that what we're going to have him for? More like an hour and 10 minutes, I think, today. So it's a long time. We'll get through as many questions with him as we possibly can. All right. So just back to that whole press thing again. You know, I'm not one for trying to oversell a story, trying to invest or inject is a better word, any extra drama into a story to drag it out. Let me tell you that what we're seeing in the United States with the Trump administration and his attitude to the media and his belief that he can dictate when and where and how he interacts with the media, and his assertion that he can just, eliminate media organisations and get rid of them and have nothing to do with them and not speak to them because he decides that they're putting out fake news. This is incredibly, incredibly dangerous. It really is. And while, as I said, independent media, stalwarts, the big players in the independent media are laughing and joking, think it's hilarious, think it's fantastic, think it's indicative of a new system and a brave new world. This guy is on our side in all of that. Remember, the biggest cheerleader for Donald Trump and the biggest cheerleader for this Trump administration attitude to the media is this guy here.
And I got a center! I don't need a bullhorn! I don't need any of it! The will of the Republic will dominate this BS! Yeah! 1776, baby. 1776 will commence again! You like it? This is just the info war. Imagine you get in a physical fight with us, it's over! You understand that? I know you do now, don't you? We haven't taken the gloves off, and if you want to keep pushing with your commie Chinese and everybody else, we're going to blow your ass off the map. All the secret weapons ain't in the control of you anymore, are they? They're now in the hands of George Washington 2.0, so I know why you're shaking in fear. I'm done. Who else wants to...
I sincerely hope... No, I'm not going to say what I was going to say because it would have been wrong to say it. I was going to say something really... I'm glad I stopped myself there about him and about people around him and the possibility that he's dangerous. Alex Jones is a lunatic, and he's a dangerous lunatic. And Infowars.com has just become an extension of the Donald Trump election campaign website. That's all it is. And that lunatic is leading the independent media cheerleading of the Rothschild Zionist warmongering lunatic Donald Trump. That's what you have. It's exactly, what is it? It's exactly 22 and a half minutes to the top of the hour. I'm going to take a quick break. Back in a minute.